Hello and welcome to a new video. I bet this one's caught a few of you off guard considering how long it usually takes me to upload new videos. But yeah, in this one we are going to make a simple puzzle platformer rollerball game. So this is going to be, if you think Marble Madness kind of thing, but instead of it being 3D, it's 2D. Well, I mean it is 3D, but it's in a 2D playing field, like a side-scrolling game. And we're going to use the Unity physics stuff to do most of the work. And this is one of those where if you know what you're doing, it's really easy to do. And if you don't know what you're doing, it can be a bit daunting. So this is aimed more at beginners, but I don't know, maybe the intermediates and those of you who watch this channel who know far more than me will still find something beneficial, who knows. Anyway, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is make a little bit of a makeshift level. So I've got my main camera, which is sat at x1 minus 10, and I'm going to leave that there. And the important thing here is that it is facing the Z axis, or it's facing towards Z. Like Z is front to back. When I say important, it's important for the way I've written the code. Obviously, you can make it face whichever way you want as long as you modify the code accordingly. So we're going to drag in first thing I'm going to do for neatness' sake is I'm going to create an empty and I'm going to call it level piece. Level pieces. And we'll just reset that, and I'm just going to drop everything in there. So let's start off by adding a cube, which we're going to make, say 50 long, 1 by 1 seems fine. I just want to drag that down so it's just at the bottom there. And then I'm going to duplicate that, and this one we're going to make, let's say 5, and we're just going to put this up here. I'm going to duplicate that again. Let's go a little bit closer. I'm going to put that there. And then finally, we're going to drag in a sphere. So we're going to be using the colliders of the actual cubes and everything that Unity drags in. Obviously, if you were doing your own level, you would probably want to refine things and optimize things a bit more, and you might make your own colliders for the whole level or whatever, but for this tutorial, we're going to show how everything works with odd shapes and everything, so I'm just going to drag in a regular sphere. We're going to make it 5, 5, 5. Yeah, that looks alright. And we shall put it about there. So as you can see, everything is on one plane essentially. Yes, there's 3D depth, but that's just going to be for visual effect. So we're going to have 3D looking levels, but we're only going to be using this as though it's a 2D platformer. So now we need to add our ball, which is going to be our main character. So we're going to add another sphere. We're going to call this one ball to differentiate it from anything else. And we shall reset the position on that. And I'm going to drag him, we'll leave him at 1, 1, and I'm going to drag him over here. So our ball is going to need a rigid body component. So we're going to add one, and then we need to change these values. I've messed around with these values, and through trial and error, I've come to some numbers that I like. You feel free to mess around with them to get a ball that feels the way you like it. But it doesn't have to be these values. These are just ones that I've found work. So 0.2 mass, 1 drag, 1 angular drag. And then these ones are we'll just change discrete to continuous. And then these ones are important. You want to freeze the position on the Z-axis, just Z-axis, because we don't want him moving that way. We stay in that 2D plane. And then for the same reason, we are freezing the rotation on the X and Y axis, because then that would allow, we're going to be using the ball's rotation and physics to move the ball. So if we allow him to rotate in those directions, he could roll forwards and backwards off the map, basically. The next thing we need for the ball is a physics material. So I've created a physics material folder here. It's up to you whether you want to do that, just keeps things a bit neater. Create a physics material, which I'm just going to call ball, and I'm going to keep 0.6, 0.6, but bounciness I'm going to have at 8. And then if we drag that material into our ball's sphere collider, and that is that for that. So scripts folder next, and we're going to create a camera script, which is going to be called camera follow, and this is going to be the script that handles, well, the camera following something. So to start with, we want a bunch of serialized fields. They could be public, but they don't need to be public. We're not accessing them from anywhere else. This is just so they show up in the inspector. And the first one's a transform target. And the target is basically what the camera is going to be following. In this case, the ball, but it could be anything. And then we also want a vector3, which is going to be the offset. And that is the offset that the camera is from the ball. So if we had it just moving to the ball's position, we wouldn't see the ball because the camera would be inside the ball. So this is telling us where we want the camera to be in relation to the ball. And then we want a speed value, so that's how quickly the camera follows the ball. So the higher it is, the more the more in tune the camera is going to be with the ball, like it's going to move at the exact same speed if we have the speed high enough, whereas a lower speed is more of like a lazy follows along with the ball. And then we also want a vector2, and we're going to call this x limit, and then another vector2, which we're going to call a y limit. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to tell the camera how far it can go to the left and the right and to the top and the bottom. So we don't want the camera to go too far down, too far up, too far left, too far right, that kind of thing. It basically allows us to put visual limits on the level. And then the final value we need is a vector3, and that's just going to be called destination, and that is basically the value that we're going to modify our destination vector3 in. Okay, so I've just copied a few notes in there. So now we're going to get into the actual code, and we want to do this in a fixed update. And the reason for that is because we're following a physics object, and if we use the camera to follow a physics updated object, you can get like jerkiness if you don't do it in the fixed update. So the first thing we do is we get our destination's base value, which is going to be target.position plus offset. So say our offset is just exact same x and y position, but -10 on the z-axis, and then the target itself is at 0, 0, 0. The camera is going to be at 0, 0, -10. So that's just our base position, but we need to do some manipulating on it. So the first thing we do is destination x is going to equal mathf.clamp, and this is just to keep it within those values. So the number that we are clamping is the destination.x value, and we are clamping it between xlimit.x and xlimit.y. And then we want to do the same thing for the y value. And then finally, transform.position is going to equal vector3.move towards, and we are moving from the transform's current position to the destination, and we're using speed times time.delta time to do it with. Okay, so let's go back to Unity, and now we've got these values that we should be able to add in our camera. So first one we want to drag in is our ball, obviously. Offset I'm going to keep at 0 on the x, so it's always going to be left to right is always going to be in line with the ball unless it hits a limit, obviously. Y I'm going to set to 1 so that it's slightly above the ball, just because I find that is like more aesthetically pleasing. And then Z wants to be -10, so it's always going to be this side. It's going to be -10 of the ball. So obviously if it was 0, it would be like here. So -10. The speed I'm going to set to 3. I found that to be quite accurate. Now these values, there's no set values for the limits. Basically just move your camera around and see what feels right. So I'm going to limit the x value to, let's go -6.5. And then I think 6.5 the other way will probably be fine. Yeah. And then the lower y limit, I'm going to have where it is. So that's 1. And then the upper y limit will have level with that level platform there, which is 9. So now if I drag my camera back here, roughly, and we press play, we can see that the camera moves to the position. And if we move the ball around, the camera should follow it. But crucially, the physics needs to do an update. You can see the camera stops at the limit. So if I move that up here, and you can see the physics all working there. Now we need to get our ball going. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add 2 audio source components, and we'll see why that is in a moment. And we are going to have to be able to distinguish between these, but we'll get to that shortly. And we want to create a new script, which we're just going to call ball controller. And we'll drag that ball controller onto the ball, obviously. Let's open that script up. We'll start off with the variables as always. First variables that we're going to put in are our movement values, which are public float, and we're going to have roll speed, and then public float jump force. These are pretty self-explanatory. And then the next one is our components. So serialize field. The reason these are public, by the way, in this tutorial we're not going to need them to be public, but you would probably want these to be public in a proper game because you want to be able to modify them from other places, whereas these almost certainly not going to need to get at unless you're doing something way out of what this tutorial is showing you. So we're going to get the rigid body, which we'll call RB, and then we want our audio sources, and the first one we're going to call rolling audio source, and then the other audio source is going to be called impact audio source. Again, these should be pretty self-explanatory. And then finally we're going to have some internal values that aren't going to be in the inspector at all. Float horizontal, float dist to ground, public bull, which is grounded. Again, that's one that you might want to get out from outside of the script, but in this tutorial we're not going to need to, but you will probably want that one to be public. And then finally a was grounded value, and we'll get to why that is shortly. So in our awake function, we're only going to have one thing in here, and that's going to be dist to ground equals get component rigid body, get component collider dot bounds.extents.y, and you do need to have these brackets here while I'm getting that error. And what that's doing is it's getting the distance from where the object is to the outer edge of its collider. So in this case, it's a sphere. The origin is in the middle of the sphere. So if the sphere is 1 diameter, 1 unit, then it's going to be coming back with 0.5 because it's halfway to the bottom of the sphere. So now we can get into our update script. And the first thing we're going to get in here is our horizontal value, which is going to equal input.getAxis horizontal. And I'm sure everybody who's watching this video knows this, but if you don't, that will return a value between -1 and 1, which represents whether we're pressing the A and D key, the left and right arrow, the joypads, analog stick. That all comes back from this, unless you've changed it in the input manager. Now we want to know if we're grounded, and that's for the main reason we want to know if we're grounded is so that we know whether we can jump, because obviously if you don't check whether you're grounded, then the player could just keep jumping to infinity, and we don't want that. So is grounded equals physics.raycast. So this is casting a physics ray out from wherever we tell it for how far we tell it, and it returns whether it hits anything basically. And we're going minus vector3.up because we got that's down essentially, but there isn't a vector3.down. Dist to ground, that's the value we got before, and then we just want to go a little bit further to make sure we're actually going below the collider of the sphere. You don't want this value to be too big because then you could be coming back as grounded when you're technically hovering above the ground, but 0.01f should be plenty, and I've got a bracket in the wrong place there. So now we're going to apply our actual rotation using the add torque value. Add torque is how you rotate a physics object using the physics engine. So obviously we could just change the rotation, but then that would mess with the physics. So we want to do everything through the physics engine. That way all the physics should stay consistent. It's usually, I mean, no physics engine's perfect, but it's usually when you start modifying things outside of the physics engine and expecting physics to remain consistent, that's when things go wrong. So we're rotating around the forward axis, and we're doing the minus is just the way it is, because if we didn't do it this way, it'd rotate back to front, and we're timesing that by roll speed. Now we're going to get into something, well actually let's just try that. So let's drag our sphere, no, not a sphere collider, our rigid body in there. First audio source, second audio source, although we haven't got to that yet. Roll speed and jump force. I'm not entirely sure what I set them as, so let's just go with 1 and 7 for now. So as you can see, the rolling works. And if I roll over this way, the camera stops. Now we haven't implemented a jump yet, so we can't make it jump, but that is our next challenge. So we're going to say if is grounded. We only want to be able to jump if we're actually grounded. And then in here, and the reason we're doing this in a separate if statement is because there's going to be more stuff in here, but we'll get to that. If input dot get button down, we only want to get it when it's down, because if you just get button, then you get it anytime the button's held down, which means it just carry on jumping every frame. Bearing in mind that you could be getting 300 frames a second on something like this. You don't want that. So then we're going to say rigid, if button jump, which should be the spacebar if you've got the Unity Input Manager all set to standard stuff. If you've been messing with it, then you should know what to do with this. But jump should be the standard one. So we're going to say add force this time, not torque. We're adding it in the direction of up. And just because if we just add the up force, what you'll find is that when you're rolling along and you jump, you lose a lot of your forward momentum, and it makes for an unsatisfying game mechanic. So we're also going to add a little bit of left and right, depending on what the player's doing. So we're just going to say times horizontal times 0.5. And again, this is a number that I've just messed around with and come to that feels good enough for me. You might want to change that. And then we're going to times that by jump force. So just to be clear, we're sending it upwards, and then we're also giving it half of the left-right value that is currently being implemented. This one here. Multiplied by jump force, and then we want to tell it that force mode is impulse. There's different force modes. Some of them, you think of it as like a sudden push rather than a continuous gentle force like you might get from like a thruster. So now if we go back, we should be able to jump depending on whether I've given it a decent enough jump value. Oh, I definitely gave it a decent enough jump value. I gave it too much. Let's try 3. That's still a bit much. 2? That's probably close enough. So as you can see, you get this, that value could probably do with being tweaked a bit, but the thing is, we're trying to only use physics. So once the ball's in the air, there's very limited, like you can play with the angular drag and all those kinds of things as well, but there's very limited movement you can impart on it just by using the rotation. You have to start, imparting left and right force based on the arrow keys using the physics engine. I was trying to keep it as simple as possible, so maybe we could look at that in more depth in another video. But I find, like, for me, this seems to be satisfying enough. Now, about those audio sources. So in our in our is grounded loop, the first thing we want to do here is check if we were grounded before. And the reason for this is because the only way we can tell if we've just landed on the ground is by knowing that we weren't on the ground in the last frame, but we are on the ground now. So if we are grounded now, but we weren't grounded before, that means we've just landed from being in the air. And in that case, we want to say impact audio source dot volume equals RB dot velocity dot magnitude divided by 10. Again, these are numbers that I've messed around with trial and error to get right, but essentially what's happening here is we're setting the volume based on how far we've fallen or how fast we are falling when we've hit the ground. So the slower, like, you pick up speed as you fall, the closer to the ground you are when you fall, the slower you're going to be moving, the quieter this noise will be. And then we're going to say impact audio source dot play. So if we try that now, like, first off, we're going to need a sound. I will link to where I got these sounds from in the description, but basically we're going to drag this one here, which is called thud, into one of the audio sources. The volume doesn't matter because the code's going to change it itself. I'm going to set the spatial blend up to maximum 3D. Reverb zone is not really important for this. We don't want it to play on awake and we don't want it to loop. This is a one-off sound. And just before I forget, we actually, quite an important part of this is we have to set the was grounded value. So if we go to the bottom of our update function, and the last thing we do before the end of the update function is say was grounded equals is grounded. So save that, go back to Unity, and I'm just going to re-drag these in because I'm not 100% sure I dragged them at the right place. So the one that we've put the sound on, that's this one, wants to be in impact audio, and then the other one's going to be in the other one. We haven't put the sound in that yet. So let's just try that. And you can see we've got a thud sound. And obviously you want to get, if you were making a proper game, you want to get a bit fancier and make it be a different sound depending on the surface you're landing on, but that's for another video. So, about those rolling sounds. So we want to go to the bottom of our is grounded if loop here, or if statement, and we're going to say if rolling audio source dot is playing, sorry, if not rolling audio source is playing. And the reason for this is because otherwise, if we don't check that it's not playing already first, then it's going to continually start over at every frame and you just get a sound. And we don't want that. We want the audio loop. It's a loop that I've used. You're going to want to find a loop for yours as well. We want that loop to just keep playing while it should be playing and then stop playing when it's not, but we don't want it to keep starting over and over again. So if it's not already playing and we are grounded, rolling audio source dot play. At the end of this loop, say else, and we're just going to tell it to stop playing if we're in the air, if we're not grounded. And that'll just stop it from making any noise, this audio source from making any noise if we're not on the ground. But you might be asking, what if you're not moving? What if you're on the ground and you're not rolling? Well, that's going to be covered by our audio volume handling, which goes like this. Rolling audio source dot volume equals RB dot angular velocity. So this time we're looking at the velocity that it's spinning, not the velocity that it's moving through the level. Dot magnitude, and again, this number I just came to trial and error. And then if we go back to Unity, all we need to do now is to drag our sound in. So this is the rolling one I've got into the other audio source. Make sure you don't drag it onto the same one as before. We don't want to play on awake, and we want to loop. And again, I'm going to put spatial blend up to full 3D. And as you saw at the start of the video, with just a little tweaking of the assets used in the game, you can turn it into a proper looking game that looks like this. So that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed that video. Hopefully I'll be back with another video in equally quick time rather than the usual 3 to 4 months it's taken me recently. So yeah, all that's left to do is to thank my amazing Patreons who have stuck by me through this dry period. And a special thanks, of course, go to the Sugar Daddy / Mama Tier Patreons, who are Dave Maldine, Reg Reed, Gabriel White, Aaron Clark, Mr. Drunken Dragon, Andrew Hansen, and Aji. And a special thanks goes to Jimmy, or because I forgot to credit him for his Patreon support a number of times, and I apologise profusely for that. So that's all for now. Thank you everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.